Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Mick. Hi, Kindra. Welcome to the podcast. I'm super pumped you guys are here.
Yes, thanks. Good to see you again.
I know it's good to see you. I'm like, after I had my podcast interview with you guys, I'm like, I need to have them on because you guys talk about parental alienation. I know we're going to get into all of it, but first, let's start with how did you guys link up? What is that story? Because you guys are the first people that I've had. Usually I'm interviewing one person, but you're the first people, the group of people.
Yeah, we're a team, right, Mick?
Yeah.
We're a mighty team. That is correct.
We are. Well, and I think the concept was, and I'll let Mick kind of tell how we got introduced, but I think the concept is to have a female viewpoint and a male viewpoint to parental alienation, and divorce and other things that comes with that. But it seems like our topic and our interest has really taken us down the parental alienation route. So that's why we connected. So I'll let Mick tell how.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting story and it's a good question. So we have a mutual contact who we call the coach, Jules, and she had contacted both of us and knew both of us. She had us on her podcast, and then kind of spilling over from there, we sort of had the idea, well, maybe you guys should have your podcast together. So that's actually how, I'm going to put in quotes, we met, because we hadn't met then for a complete year. So fortunately, Kindra came out to California, where I am, not long ago in September or so. And that was the first time that we met physically. So we've actually been working, and I think working really well together as a team for a year before we actually met physically. And I think the idea is what Kindra had said. It's sort of like a he said, she said type of scenario, because we got a male and a father, we've got a female and a mother who have both experienced these kind of very unfortunate things, but then we have our own perspective as well. So we're very similar and very dissimilar, but I think that's what makes the podcast interesting.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating too, because there's always, I experienced that with my audience as well. It's great for me to give them the stepmom side of it, but then also I hear, well, what did your husband experience? Or what did he go through? Or what was he thinking? Or why would he do something like this? Or why is my partner doing something like that? So I think that's great that you both have, that you're both on there. So you've got both perspectives. That's super fascinating. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. And like Mick said, I think our coach was very good at matching up our personalities too, because Mick is on one end of things and very organized and very structured. And I'm the person that kind of jumps in and asks different questions during our interviews. So we balance each other really, really well. So just our personalities mesh really well.
Oh, you know what? I did notice that. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh, I did notice that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah. I'm more like you, Kindra. Oh, let's talk about this. As you saw, pre-recording, I was like, oh, what about this and what about that? Okay. So let's talk, let's start super basic. What is parental alienation?
Mick, that sounds like a formal question. I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, there's the $64,000 question. And I'll give you a little insight into my experience with it and going through what we call the process of being interviewed by counselors and psychiatrists and people who are supposedly very well qualified. I was identified as a juvenile delinquent. Now, you can see me and my beard and my age and my voice. I'm obviously not a juvenile, and I don't think I'm a delinquent, but when they're analyzing you, that's what they came up with. I think because they were struggling to find something. This guy's a problem. We're not sure why or how, but let's call him something. But parental alienation is when one person in a marriage takes the child or children somewhere else and interferes with that person's parenting style and all their access to the child. So in my case, I found out literally over police radio because I was trying to track down my daughter and where she was. I heard over a police radio because I contacted the police. She was 3,000 miles away, and that's how I found out. I was living in California at the time, And I was in Pennsylvania. Sorry, just the opposite. I was in Pennsylvania at the time when I found out that our daughter was in California. So it's a way of saying, I've lost my child or children somehow due to the actions of the other person. And this has been a very difficult question, as we've had experts, Kindra can attest to. There are different views on defining parental alienation, even if it's in fact real or not. And that's something that the psychiatrists and the counselors and that community is discussing and talking about. I guess it's still a hot topic because they're still talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow.
I'll add to that, I think 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it didn't have that term parental alienation, right? It was a parent that talks bad about the other parent and tries to interrupt the relationship with the parent, with another parent. That was just kind of known as is a typical divorce, right? That's typically what happens. One parent will kind of, try to take the kids and align with them and get them to talk bad about them. Well, now it is grown so much that it has a term behind it because it is so well known throughout the world. Even our podcast, and Mick can allude to this, but our podcast is heard throughout the world and we have guests on throughout the world because it is really the strategy of one parent, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is to damage the child's relationship with the other parent.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just talking bad about them or hearing negative things, but it's interfering with custody, right? Even though you have a court order, they're going to, not follow the court order. So it's interfering with custody. It's interfering with any time that you might have scheduled to talk to that child. That might be interfered with, as well as, again, to Mick's point, it might be as far as even false allegations of abuse, so that the court system separates you until they do further investigation. It might also be, running with a child across state lines, because that's harder to, it's just harder legally to track down the kid and also enforce court orders.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Mick, thanks for sharing your story. When you said that, I literally got like tingles like all over my body. I can't even imagine hearing that over a police scanner and just like what you must have gone through. Like, so thank you for sharing that. I feel like there's so many different levels of parental alienation, right? Like it could be, Kendra, like you said, like it could be interfering with time that people are supposed to be talking to their kids, or, something as drastic as like escaping like to a different state or running away to a different state, right? And so let me ask you this then. How hard is it to prove parental alienation? I feel like that would be really hard because there's so, like the spectrum is so huge, right?
Sure.
And because I already know, because I've got stepmoms that are like, well, the mom wants to call and talk at 6 p.m. Well, 6 p.m. is when we eat dinner at our house. And so I say, hey, it's not going to work right now. Or, my partner says, hey, it's not going to work right now. Can we do it in like an hour? Is that parental alienation? And I'm like, no, it's not. Like if you're like intentionally like, hey, you're cutting this out, or you're not trying to, you're actually coming back with, it doesn't work right now. Can we do it like in an hour? Can we do it in like a little bit of time? And so I feel like people are a little like hypersensitive or hyper aware or super cognizant of like anything can and say will be used against me, right? Because it's kind of like what we live in right now of like, I'm on edge about whatever action I'm taking or whatever action I'm not taking based on how it could possibly be misconstrued. And it's really easy to do like worst case scenario, right?
Yeah. So you are completely right. That is not parental alienation. If you are working with the other parent to, change the time or something, that's fine. That's not completely cutting the child off or making them fear the other parent or, specifically interrupting or not having that time with them. As far as, as far as proving it, that's always a fun question that Mick and I ask our interviewees. And, the answer is it's not in the DSM. So it's not identified as a psychological syndrome.
Wait.
Something that needs to
Before
be
you
addressed.
continue, can you explain to people that are listening that might not know what DSM is?
Mick?
It's a diagnostic and statistical manual. So
Okay.
It's a diagnostic book that for anyone in psychiatry or psychology can say, here are the things, like, here's a question. Are you normal? Well, it's a very difficult question to answer, isn't it? Of course I'm normal, but what is abnormal? So this is a guidebook for a person to say, here are the certain criteria that are met, and then they can identify that you're schizophrenic or whatever malady you supposedly are suffering from. So that's why it's controversial, because there are those who are advocating parental alienation and calling that should be in a diagnostic manual, and there's others who say no, it is not. And that's the difficulty of defining exactly and to what extent. That's the real key question. To what extent? Person calls it an inconvenient time, well, that's not alienation. But if they take their child to another state with no announcement about it or no plan, yeah, I would argue that that's an alienation.
And you have to show a trend of activities that has happened over the course of, a couple months, 6 months, a year, right? So keeping a journal is very important in order to prove this. And I'm putting that in air quotes because it's very hard to prove. So when you ask that, even if it goes into the DSM, my personal feeling, just from interviewing everybody that we have, and all of the experts, this is coming from experts, that it's still going to be hard to prove because it is based on still a human that is making that decision. And every human in every county, every state, every even country, right, is different. So that judge that's making the decision is still unaware, uneducated on parental alienation, to the point that they can pay attention to the experts that might be on the stand. They might fall asleep. They might be playing a game. All of that has been stated from our expert that has been on the stand, that those things happen. So it's really what the judge is educated on, what they believe, and if they think that it's really going on, or if there's enough proof. And there's attorneys that don't even believe in it. So you can't get an attorney that is representing you that doesn't believe in it.
Right. Do you think that, and again, like going back to like judges not being educated on it, and whatever, like there's so many different things, right? Because they're human, they've got their own life going on, right? Like they could have had like a stressful situation, whatever, like they didn't maybe read through all of your case, whatever the case may be. Do you find that more moms, dads, men, women are accused of parental alienation? Or like based on who you guys have talked to?
That's where statistically it's usually a man who has been alienated, but that's what's so important about Kindra and Kindra's story, because as I have come across people, not only Kindra, but other mothers and women who have experienced this, and this is what I always try to emphasize. So when I was going through this, of course, I thought, oh yeah, the whole world is against me, and it's a man and it's a father. But I think the broader picture is to say that this can happen to anyone at any time, regardless of their background, rich, poor, black, white, male, female, it doesn't matter. And what Kindra is saying is what we have heard from the experts. We had one person who said, I can take the same set of facts and the same incidents to Judge A, and they will rule one way. Take the same set of facts and the same information to Judge B, and they rule the complete opposite. So I say to myself, well, then this is a totally broken system then. This makes no sense. This is crazy. And of course, yes, this is a broken, corrupt system that many people who are involved, the professionals themselves, are not educated and aware enough of what actually is occurring, nor do they even care sometimes. Like when Kindra said, we had people were saying judges are sometimes they're playing on their phones, they're doing something else, they're not listening.
That is so wild. Like that's wild to me. Why do you think it is that people aren't educated about it? Do you think it's because maybe they have never been through a divorce? Do you think it's because like just life in general? Do you think that it's because it's become more normal? Like, what do you guys have any, I'm not going to hold you to this. It's just like, what do you think that there's a reason though, why it's not like something that the court system is more aware of or more like open to?
Well, I can answer. I don't want to jump in there, Kindra, if you want to, but I'd say the average person, let's say if they don't have higher motives and higher ideals, are motivated by three things: power, sex, or money. And in a system such as it is currently set up, everyone that I can see, they may be looking for power, but they definitely have a financial incentive to keep the system exactly the way that it is. So your counselors, your psychologists, I mean, these people are making huge amounts of money. So in my case, I was in Pennsylvania, the top university in Pennsylvania. These were people who are exceptional qualifications. And I'm saying to myself, yeah, but I'm giving thousands and thousands of dollars for a really disturbing analysis. And I'm taking it personally, just anybody, if you have a rational mind, you're going to say, no, there's something wrong with this evaluation. And that's what I'm saying. So your counselors, your lawyers, your judges, the system as it's set up, to me, in my opinion, is corrupt because everyone has an incentive financially to keep the system exactly the way that it is. And that's why Kindra can jump in because she's our legislative advocate. She's very active in this area.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of your points, Mick. It's a money-making business, right? They're all working together. So a parental alienation case, when that claim is kind of made, all of them see dollar signs because it's going to extend a custody hearing. Instead of it just being a couple months, it's now going to be a year or 2 years because you are going to involve all those extra people. You're going to involve counselors. You're going to get a psych eval. You're going to have the guardian ad litem. You're going to have all these people involved. All of them are making money. The most I've ever heard anybody spend is $700,000 to get their kids back from a parental alienation case. I spent $190,000 in 4 years and had to walk away from the court systems. And it is a problem in the civil family court system. It is a problem. Now, what we are working, like Mick alluded to, to change in that is the law. You have to go to the law and change the law. So we are working in every state. It has to be changed that it is 50-50 from the very beginning, unless there are extenuating circumstances. But typically what happens in the parental alienation case is there has been no claims during a marriage that there is abuse or anything going on in the household. Once a divorce or separation happens, now one person wants to claim that the other parent is abusing the children. Right. That's kind of how this starts. It's a playbook. It's a playbook that they all have written. I don't know who wrote it and they all get it. So once that happens, then it goes into a custody battle, right? Of parental alienation. You have protection orders involved. We had one of our guests on, and he owns a very large law firm throughout the United States. And he said protection orders are used as weapons. So the only way to get it fair to start off is going to be 50-50. So each parent gets 50-50, and that's custody, right? Decision-making and visitation. And we hate to say that term visitation because when you're married, you don't get visitation with your kids, you get your kids, right? So it needs to be 50-50. You need to see your kids and be involved in their decisions. Mm-hmm. Sweden actually has this in place. They see very little criminal accusations made on domestic violence. And they also don't have nearly as many cases as we do in the family court system. So it works. It's proven. So state by state, we are changing the law. Texas, Arkansas, Kentucky have all bought into this, and Ohio has it proposed along with probably 15 others. So there is a nationwide movement that this needs to be changed by the state. It needs to start off 50-50. And those kids get equal rights to the parents in all aspects. Now, what I will tell you that we found out from one of our guests, which I thought was very interesting, if you look in your state, if you're having parental alienation issues, you look in your state, there is a criminal. Typically, when a cop shows up and one parent's refusing to allow the child to go with another parent, it is filed as a police report as just an incident report. You want an offense report, and when you get that allows you to file criminal charges because there's usually a custodial interference criminal charge. It could be a misdemeanor up to a felony. You can press criminal charges with a prosecutor, just like you would any other criminal accusation. The police don't usually know about that. Law enforcement doesn't usually know about that, and they're not privy to that, and they don't know that. So you need to do your research, take it to them, call the cops and say, look, this is going to happen. I'm taking this. I'm referencing this code that's in my state. And I need you to write up this report for me this specific way because I'm going to file criminal charges.
Okay, wait. Let's go back over that because I know that you
I
guys
know
listen to
I gave a lot.
No, but here's why, like, because people listen to podcasts, right? When they're doing what? The dishes, laundry, they're running errands, they've got kids in the house, whatever. So if you are multitasking and you're listening to this, come back for just a second. If you feel like there's going to be a parental alienation thing going on, call the police and go ahead, Kindra, take it from there.
Yep. You want to make sure you tell them you want am I saying this right, Mick, an offense report?
Yes. And the point is, the legal side of it is I am exercising my parental rights. So it's not as though a police officer or anyone else has to determine anything. That's the beauty of it. All I'm doing is what I'm entitled to do based on a court order, and a police officer is then going to enforce what is already in law and already assigned a case and a court order by a judge.
Now,
Okay,
not
so
every state has this. Not every state
Right.
has this, and there is a difference. So a lot of the times the cops will show up and say, I can only write up a report. I can't enforce it. I can't make the child go. You need to go back to your attorney. That's what we hear in civil family court, right? What can actually happen, though, if you have a penal code in your state, is you can go after them criminally. You just need a different report. So you need to ask that officer to write up an offense report. And then the way that it's written up, you can file criminal charges.
Okay. So if somebody is like, oh, that's great. Thanks, Kendra, for that. When do I use this? Would it be like on transition day? Like that's kind of what it sounded like the scenario that you guys were using.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I mean, here's the real life example. Child was supposed to be returned home where I was in the family home. I had the court order. The child is not there. I call the police and I say, Mr. Policeman, I have a court order. And the police officer looked and he said, what Kindra is saying, you counter it. There's nothing I can do. I can't enforce a court order. And also they told me, well, it doesn't have the raised seal officially from the court. And I go, well, it's a copy, but it's still saying what the judge is supposed to do. So that's the difference. When an officer showed up, it was a Friday. I was supposed to have my child for the weekend. Well, what can he say? So, well, call your lawyer on Monday. Okay, well, then that means then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where's the child? The court order was not enforced. And that's the beauty of forcing it as a criminal charge, as opposed to just the officer showed up and it's an incident.
Got it. Okay. And Kendra, we haven't, but do you want to share your story?
I can share parts of it. Yes,
Okay.
that would be fine. In my situation, it started off as, kind of talking negative about me. Then it grew to creating a fear in the children that they were fearing me, questioning the way I was parenting, questioning what I was giving them to eat, questioning activities we were doing, saying I have to call, my dad and tell him what we're doing, or, I have to make sure that dad's okay with this. Right. So rather than just having my time, we'll say my time, right. Of that dedicated week, it was very much interfering. Then it went to accusations of abuse, in which a protection order was filed and Children's Services was called in and investigation was done. Children's Services closed that investigation 2 weeks later because you cannot determine where the bruises came from, whether the child fell down or whatever. Right. So then I had to so we went through a protection order though, that lasted 7 months. The reason is because his attorney knew how to draw it out, make it linger on. It should have been done within a couple weeks, done and reunited. The children actually had an interview with the judge behind closed doors. And the judge told our attorneys that this is a child simply mad at mom for a punishment that she did, and now has blown it up and they need to be reunited. This needs to be fixed. You need to get in counseling. However, attorneys got involved. It was drug out. It was made way worse. And so for 7 months, myself or any of my family members, due to that protection order, was not able to contact the children. During that time of the 7 months, the brainwashing kind of started. And so then you have, fearing and questioning. The best way I think to put it was one of our guests explained it this way, Mick, is children are always questioning and watching and learning, right? So when someone's telling them or asking them, well, what did your mom do? Or what did your dad do? What did they feed you? They give you a salad. Oh, you weren't allowed to have pizza. Oh my gosh, how'd that make you feel? Were you sick? Did she yell at you? Did she punish you? Did she do anything? And then they start questioning. They're like, oh, did that happen? Did that really happen? They start questioning, especially when you have a separation from a parent for that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Funny story. The funny part of it was after 7 months, it was my turn to get on the stand and tell my story. I was totally prepped for it. My attorney had prepared me for it. And that day, my ex walks in and drops all the charges, all the accusations. So at that time that they are false, right? When he has drug it out for 7 months, everybody's spent money, and now he's dropping it. He knew he wasn't going to win. We then have to go into a reunification period because I have to reunite with my children because they don't know me, even though I gave birth to them. And so you slowly have to be reunited through the court system. The way the court system has it set up, you have to have supervised visitation for a certain amount of time. Then you go to an 8-hour visit. Then you go to unsupervised. Then you go to weekend visit one night. And then, you get up. So anyways, I work towards that, right? That was 50-50. So we get back to that. And then we finally come to our divorce after 3 years. We're ready to file for the divorce.
This was before the divorce was even final.
Correct. This is all during separation.
Wow.
Yes. This is how then he assumed custody, right? Because the judge isn't going to, even though nothing was proven that anything happened, right? Everything was denied. Child services dropped it, right? He dropped the case. The judge still isn't going to take the chance of, oh, maybe this parent is a bad parent, so I don't know if I'm going to place them. However, in the depositions, it was asked, did you ever call the police on mom before? Did you ever disagree with her parenting before? No. But now all of a sudden you get divorced and now you're going to start all this, right? So that was parental alienation. That was shown in evidence. Mm-hmm. However, based on attorney recommendation, I took the non-custodial parent position with 50-50 visitation.
Oh, okay.
It worked for a month. Then he decided to file criminal charges on the same accusation he made 2 years prior. And so those criminal charges then created a no contact order, and that no contact order, the whole thing. I mean, I just cycled through the whole thing again, right? That was proven a whole year later, and it was dropped by prosecutors. Same thing. And I will tell you, mine is playbook. You talk to anybody else, they've gone through it. The guy that spent $700,000 went through 43 false allegations in fighting criminal and civil.
I think that's the worst, because once you get that allegation, it can be so life damaging, right? Because it can affect where you work, where you can or can't get a job. Like even if it's an allegation and it's proved to be completely false,
correct,
there are things that you have to admit on a job interview or an application. And so like, oh, you're a child abuser, can't have you here, right? So, oh my gosh. And yeah, just, I can imagine, just like, when is this nightmare going to end? When can I get off this roller coaster of everything? And it is shocking to me. I mean, it shouldn't be, but it is shocking to me that even though everything is proven false, you still have to go through this reunification process.
Yep. I'll never forget my kid. My youngest came back to me. My oldest was upset.
How old were they at the time?
They would have been 12 and 9.
Okay.
My 12-year-old was very upset, angry, hurt because he was told that his family didn't love him. His other side of the family didn't love him. And that's why they didn't contact him. The youngest was very hurt, didn't understand. I'll never forget when he looked at me, and he gave me this biggest hug and he started crying. He said, "Mom, I prayed for you every night because I knew you pray." And he said, "Under the stars, I knew we were looking at the same stars." And he said, I knew you were talking, to God too. And I was praying for why this was happening and when I was going to see you again.
Oh my gosh. Like, I don't normally cry on podcasts, but like, how, like, I can't even imagine. Like, I would just squeeze you right now and like, give you a hug. Like, that super sucks. And do you feel like now you're out of the woods? Like, is it completely final? As you said, like, you finally got your divorce like 3 years later.
So I still have 50-50. No problems, no allegations, no nothing, right? Everything's been dropped. I can see my kids, no problem. The problem is now my kids are older. They've been brainwashed and they choose to not see me because they have this fear that something will happen
Mm-hmm.
And when there was drama, or when, he would send somebody to do a well check, it was always, mom called the cops. Mom caused this drama, right? Mom did this
For sure.
because it happened on my time, even if I wouldn't call them, right? So it was always looking bad on me. So at some point, during this battle, my youngest also said, my oldest right away called the other lady mom, and was very submissive to everything that was going on. My youngest fought it for about 1.5 years. We got to this point where I picked him up for a visitation, and we would have a great time together. But I would pick him up for this visitation, and he said, and I just want a disclaimer here, if there's any kids listening, you might want to pause and listen later. He got in the car and he said, Mom, the elf wrote me a really nasty letter. And it was around Christmas time, and the elf had written him a horrible letter that said, if you don't change and start acting better, you're not going to get any presents. He also then told me that there was presents for all 4 of the other children, including my oldest, underneath the tree, except for him. My ex called the doctor and said, my son is acting out. Can you write a letter saying that he can't have any more sugar? I called the doctor. I recorded it with the doctor. I said, why did you write this letter? Why can't he have sugar? Well, because your ex asked me to put it in there. I said, so there's no medical diagnosis. No, it's simply because my ex was able to manipulate the doctors as well, and the therapist and everybody else. So my youngest then wasn't getting candy, wasn't getting pop, wasn't getting any of the things that the other 4 kids was getting. They would plan fun things to do while I had visitation with him. And so eventually he came out to my car and he said, Mom, I can't go this time. And I said, it's okay. I said, I'll be back next time. And I showed up the next time. And he came out to the car and he said, I can't go this time. So that's okay. I'll be back next time. And I came the next time, and he came with me, but then he never came back. And that was it. You have to sometimes, I had to learn to love my son where he was, understand the environment he was growing up in. And this is hard for me to say. You have to be the best parent you can be. And sometimes that's stepping away so that they're not hurting in the other environment, and knowing that you always will love them. I wrote them goodbye letters to the therapist, and they read it to them. But you have to be able to realize that sometimes, in order for them to survive through this alienation, you got to let them go. And you got to tell them you love them, and you got to let them go, because they have to survive. Because only coming with me was damaging more to him emotionally.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting hearing it from your perspective, because obviously, like, in my audience, it's typically the dad, Mick, that's like being alienated against. And that's what I say to them too. It's just, when this is happening, it's not about you, right? Like, if you're being alienated, it's not about you. It's about that other person wanting the power or wanting the control or whatever it is. And I always say, you and I could switch places and it would still be happening. It's got nothing to do with you. But you have to understand that sometimes stepping away is the right thing to do for everyone involved for the time being, right? Like, the kids, everyone's always like, oh, hopefully the kids will grow up and see it. Hopefully they will, right? And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But I just want to commend you for still showing up and like going there when you said that you would, right? Because that consistency, that follow through. And it's hard to still show up, even knowing that it's not going to make a difference, or it feels like it's not going to make a difference, or it feels like, why am I even doing this? Yeah. They're not even going to come with me. But like I said that I would. I just want you to know that I care. Like, I'm still here. I'm still around. We went through this too. And I really struggled with it, because at that time, super early on in our relationship, at that time that's how I was. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this is so stupid. Like, this is a waste of time. Where my husband was like you, like, I've got to keep trying. I've got to keep doing the right thing. Even if we didn't see them, like text, whatever. And I was very black and white at that point. And I was like, this is dumb. Like, you should just walk away. Like, this is so stupid. And he was like, no, I shouldn't. And now that's what I say to people like you, like, keep showing up, keep doing the things until it's not beneficial to do them anymore. At what point did you realize, okay, I need to step back?
I think that was it when the third time, and then he didn't come. I think I just realized that I needed to step back and take a different approach. I've never given up. I won't use those words because I just do a different approach. Court was too demanding and it was constant. You know, if we were in court, we were battling, right? Then dad was always saying bad things about me and all that. So I stopped court about a year ago, changed what I was doing. I send the cards to my boys every week. They get a card from me. And it has been about 3 years since I've talked to my oldest and about a year and a half, 2 years since I've talked to my youngest, or spoken to them. But you keep what's that?
How old are they now?
16 and 12.
Okay. But yeah, keep showing up.
You keep showing up. You do, because they will see that at least, you know, at the point in time, or maybe they'll look back on it. Again, that's my hope, but you keep showing up in the best way that you can show up, and you have to take care of yourself. And everybody's like, when they hear my story, they're like, I'll pray for you. And I'm like, don't pray for me, because you have to be strong as a parent. It sucks. Don't get me wrong, because when I drove away, I wasn't in tears and I had to pull over because I couldn't see. I was crying so hard. But don't pray for me. We're adults. We understand the psychological abuse and what's going on. Pray for my kids. Pray for those kids.
Yeah. I've never cried on the podcast before. So
I'm sorry.
Oh, you were like, we're doing all the first tier, like 2 people, like, and I'm crying. Can we talk about how the kids don't see it though? Because I think that a lot of people are like, how do they not see it? Like, duh, of course, like that's exactly what's happening. And it's like you said, we're adults, we see it, right? And, or like, I'm mad at the kids because they're doing this, that, and the other. Well, they don't understand what that other parent is doing or saying, right? Because their brain's not completely developed. Yours, as a functioning, hopefully adult, is. And so, like you said, you know, I have to love my kids for where they are. And that is really hard.
Yep. No, you nailed it on the head. Their brains are fully developed. They don't think that way, right? And I'll let Mick speak to this too, but their DNA is made up of both parents. So if one parent is harming or saying bad things about the other parent to that child, you are saying bad things to that child in a way, right? A roundabout way, because it's half of them. But yeah, their brains aren't developed. Mick, do you agree?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the sort of thing that we start to learn while we're talking to the experts, is that if you suggest something to a child, you can say, here's a suggestion. The child takes it in. Then a second time, you might have them say, well, did you think about what I said the first time? And they're thinking it through. And then the third time you say, did this happen? Even though it completely didn't happen, the child will say yes, even if it didn't happen, because they are impressionable. The children are taking in every single thing all the time. You know, so I've been teaching and I've seen kids and said they're sponges. They're taking it all in. So one of the experts said that if you suggest something 3 times, even if it didn't happen and it's completely false, the child will say that actually happened. That's how impressionable children are. And this is the difficulty in these kinds of situations. They undermine the other parent. Then they get the child thinking along those lines. And then by the third time, you've got the child convinced. And therefore, whatever point you were trying to get across to them, even if it is completely false, as in a false accusation against Kindra, the child still thinks that's the way it is because of one parent who is undermining the other. That's what alienation is. And that's where the extent is. When we were talking about the different grades of alienation, that's when alienation has truly existed, where you have a child agreeing to something that didn't happen.
Yeah. I saw something, I don't even know, several years ago about parental alienation, probably when I was Googling it. And it said something along the lines of the child will always side with the weaker parent. Always.
You bring up a very good point. And I'll give you an example is, you know, my son was sitting there on his bed. I'll never forget this. Sitting on his bed, and he says, I need to call dad. And I said, why? And he said, you know, can I use your phone to call dad? And I said, why? And he said, I'm worried about him because he wasn't taking care of himself. And he passed out at the store the other day and hit his head. And, the store wanted to call the ambulance, but we didn't. But I'm worried about him. Like I need to be worried. And my oldest, I remember this very vividly when we first separated. My oldest told me, Mom, I can't leave Dad because he cries every time we leave. He can't be by himself. He cries and he's upset and he's lonely. And so I told my youngest, I tried to make light of the situation. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, buddy, don't you ever worry about me? And he says, no, Mom, you have a great job. You have friends, you work out, you do things. He goes, you're fine. You'll always be fine. Mm-hmm. And to me, when I had heard that to Alicia and it clicked and I said, I'm the stronger parent. He knows no matter what, even our whole family unit, no matter what, at what time they come back to us, we will pick up and love them where we're at. Right. And we will not hold anything against them and we will be fine without them.
Yep.
Mick, did you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, it's because here's the psychology of it. The person that is truly strong in a relationship in that marriage, this is Kindra, and I think myself, they're not worried about you, but they've reversed now the role. Rather than being the child, now they are parenting the parent, which is completely wrong. But what they're doing is they've under a guilt trip, and they understand that the weaker person is the person they're always trying to please and have to make happy because they're trying to survive. And that's the person who is the alienator, but that's who they have to keep happy. They're on eggshells. So this is why they're under a lot of pressure. And what Kindra is saying, as difficult as it is, when you love someone, sometimes you have to walk away because that child is under so much pressure because that person is laying all kinds of emotional guilt upon them. Check in, make sure they're okay. Are you okay? And they have now become the parent, even though they're the child. And that's what's so wrong and so damaging about them because they're under a lot of pressure. Keep tabs. What's going on? Where are you? What did that person say? And so they're under constant bombardment. And that's what they're worried about. On the other hand, the person who is the stronger parent, they don't have to worry about. They know they're okay. And what Kindra is saying, of course, anytime, you have to stay in there and hang in there. And one of the things I was thinking about is when you walk away, this is also gives me insight because I would never be a deadbeat dad, but it kind of makes sense to me now. I understand why when a man is alienated, he's considered deadbeat because he can't keep fighting. And that's unfortunate. What the child needs to know is not necessarily contact, not necessarily taking them to Disneyland, but to know that you hung in there and you kept in it. That's what they're going to appreciate because that's what the strength they're going to see from you. And that's why Kindra's role is so important. She's just going to show up. And at some level, that child, her children start thinking, well, yeah, she was always there. I just didn't have the opportunity or chose not to engage, but that person is always going to be there. And somewhere down the road, they're going to come back.
Yeah. And Kindra, I have a question for you, but I think if it's too personal, like don't worry about answering it because I have my own thoughts too. But I think that so I was thinking about a question to ask you guys. So if you're going through parental alienation, what do you think you should do? Right? Keep showing up. Do you think that when your kids get their cards every week, that they think like there's a glimmer of hope of like, I'm going to see my mom again? Or do you think that they've thought like that far ahead? Or do you even think that's like on the spectrum at all?
It's a loaded question because I hear a lot of different sides. And first of all, I just want to disclose that you have to be mentally prepared to go through alienation as a human, as a person, as a parent. Lots of therapy, lots of counseling, support groups that are right for you. Some of them are not right. But if you decide to still remain in contact, whatever that looks like, for your mental health and for the children, I don't know that I have expectations anymore. And the reason I say that is because I do several different things, right? I have a YouTube page that they can go to and see the videos that I posted that I miss them, and memories, definitely videos, memories of all of us together. Right. I send cards, I do different things, but I don't have any expectations, because I think they're both on their separate journey. And until they get separated from the alienator and the family that's doing the alienating, I don't think they're going to really be able to see it. So I don't have expectations on when it's going to happen. You know, when they're 18, absolutely not. I don't know if they're missing me. Before I had validation that my youngest was missing me. I don't know. I don't know what they're being told. I don't know what they see right now. I don't know. A whole lot of I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it though, right? Because I think when you have expectations, and not just as necessarily in alienation, but in general, that's when everything goes to hell in a handbasket, right? Like when you've got expectations as a parent in general, when you've got expectations of your colleagues at work, when you've got expectations in your relationships, whatever the situation may be, and that expectation isn't met, I feel like that causes, or I know that causes more damage or more turmoil, even if it's just like emotional and like the expectations that you've got with yourself. Like, you know, since you say you work out, I do too, but like if you've got expectations of I should be doing X, Y, and Z, and then you don't do it, you're like, right. So then it starts that cycle for yourself. But there's so many expectations that we put on kids in general, not even like in a step situation or an alienation situation. But then you factor in all of those other things and it's that much worse. Or you factor in like the alienation and it's that much harder. It's that much worse. I feel like it's like a completely new level of like turmoil,
Yes.
challenges.
And I will say, back to Mick's point, I was very naive before my divorce in my younger years. And I thought men did abandon the family, you know, when they got divorced, that men just wanted to pay child support and leave. Now going through it, and this is why I do what I do. And I'm telling my story and speaking for those that can't, because I don't think it's fair that you lose your children through a divorce. It was more than likely an alienation situation. A lot of the men that I characterized that walked away, and they walked away because A, they couldn't handle it emotionally, or B, they couldn't handle it financially. We shouldn't have to pay to see our children. When we were in a marriage that was just fine, we were a great parent. We shouldn't have to prove to somebody we're a good parent. And so that's why I fight to change the law. That's why I fight to do the things that I do. In addition to, I don't want my children to experience this. You know, I mean, right now they're going through it, but I don't want them to experience it as parents and that they have to get pulled away from their children and go through this. So I'm fighting for that aspect as too.
Yeah, I completely hear you. And I think that when you had talked about like therapy and counseling and like all of the things as a parent, I feel like if you are going through a divorce, the very first thing everyone should do, everyone involved, kids included, is therapy. All of you, straight away, because there's so many unknowns, there's so many ups, downs, ins, outs that you don't understand like what's going to happen, right? And then you've got people that are like, well, to get back at you, I'm going to do this, and like the worst possible thing. But then it's also traumatic for the kids. Even it's traumatic for you, even if you want the divorce, right? But then like the kids, you know, being caught in the middle or not understanding, or they're too young, or they're right at the perfect age of like everything's happening. They're going through puberty and it's like the perfect storm of everything. I think that getting help is the best thing that anyone could do for everyone involved. But then like, how do you do that, right? So talk to me about how you got into the law part of it. Like, what did that look like? What, like, I have all the questions. You guys know that I'm like a question, like I'm a question person, but like, tell me more about this.
Well, I want to back up to one thing that you said, and that is get therapy. Get the right therapist. And it might take you a long time to find the right therapist, but keep searching. Mick can probably attest to this, as some of the experts that we've had on. Some of them just don't have a clue. I ended up educating them about parental alienation. I walk out and I'm like, they didn't help me at all. Right. Like, and especially as social as I am, I have tons of friends. So I can talk to anybody and share my story and get that off my chest. I don't need somebody to sit and just listen to my story. Right. Because I have plenty of people to do that. But I you know, I needed the help and the counseling to get through it and realize that I'm important, and how to prioritize that, and how to set boundaries and limits through parental alienation, how to respond. to my ex in some of the threats and communication. But Mick, you can attest that we've had people on and they've been through a lot.
Yeah, we had one individual said they had 15 attorneys. I mean, it's crazy. And I've talked to people, I said, to reiterate the therapy point, you have a decision to make. You're going to have limited resources. Any divorce, any separation is, okay, there's half the money you're going to have that you have today. It's not going to be under your control, which is very frustrating. So where best to spend your money and your time? Do you want to go to court? And I would highly urge people not to go to court, because if you read the fine print, it says something to the effect that the custody of the child or children is now by the court. So in some ways, even when you get custody, you still lost custody because the court has the custody of the children now because you appealed to help. And this is how it was explained to me. If you didn't want to be there, why'd you ask us for help? But where are you going to spend your money? Is your money best spent in a court or with attorneys, or perhaps in therapy, or somehow understanding the process that you're going through and the child or children? I think maybe money is best spent in trying to be healthy and survive.
Agree.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And then to go back to your question on the legislative part, how did I get involved? So I don't really remember the day that I kind of just said I'm going to get involved or that I found it, but the National Parents Organization is obviously national, but there's divisions in each state. And so I partner with the Ohio division to propose a law change, and contacted state reps. Several of them were on board right away because they had been through a divorce and an alienation. And so they were on board right away. They had been through false allegations, and so they understand it and the importance of it. So basically connecting my connections and all of us working together to rewrite the law, propose it, present it, speak in front of the state house and the committees. And so it's a long process to get the law change. It's not something when I started that I knew it wasn't going to affect me in a positive way, or my case or my children, but it will for future families. And so that's what I'm invested in and why.
Okay, so you say it's not going to affect you. Is that because your case is currently ongoing?
Well, for one, my case is not ongoing. It was closed prior. However, it takes years for the law to change, typically, and to go through. So you have to pass it through a committee in the House, and then you have to pass it through the Senate, and then it goes to vote in public. And so all of that takes a really long time. And to write it, right? It takes a long time, and negotiation back and forth. And you know, what's funny though, is the only opposing parties we have is the Bar Association. So going back to Mick's point, is when we're speaking on the opposition at the State House, our opposing is judges and attorneys that are sitting there opposing the law because they don't want it to be 50-50. And so going back to Mick's point, it's all about money. All about money, not about the kids, not in the best interest of the child, as the law states in every single state. That's not what it's about. It's about money.
It's so, okay, not that we're going to discuss this because we're not going to solve all the world's problems today, but like, as a country, why is it not just blanket across the country, right? Like, why is it divided up per se? It's a rhetorical question, you guys. I don't expect you to have an answer, but like.
Well, there is an answer to that. The founders of this country had a genius proposal. That is, you could have diverse laws and a wide variety of choices. So at the time, there were only 13, but they said to themselves, we have 13 choices. You have 13 colonies that became 13 states. And then it also got better because we eventually had 50. So you can pick and choose and go anywhere you want. And they didn't want the national government or a federal government, or the European example, there's one way. So if you disagree, tough luck. You have no choice whatsoever. So yes, it is complex. Yes, it is arduous and difficult, but it can and should be done. But that's what the American genius is, that we should have better places and better examples of people's choices and what they would like to have. So if Ohio has a better plan, great. I'm going to move to Ohio if another state does. And what we're trying to do, of course, the country is saying each individual community has some direct hand in choosing this. And that's why I would always encourage people. This is the idealism of the 60s and 70s when I grew up. We're going to change the world. So there's still a little bit of that in me as well, too. I can change the world. It's very difficult, but it can be done. And so, like anywhere, the answer is always the people around you, your local community, your state, where you live. And if it impacts you, and if you want to make a change, then it begins with you. So, you have to just get involved. And Kindra has not mentioned everything that she's done, but she's testified in Ohio. She's a part of a documentary. She's a really outstanding human being. And that's what it shows you. And it should encourage other people that there are people who are active and also getting very involved. And they're going to change the world, as Kindra is.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I don't deserve that credit, and I don't like bragging on myself at all. So thank you.
I didn't know any of that. I'm like, what? That's so cool.
I do it to help others in the future.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I literally could talk to you guys all day long because I find this super fascinating, and not like in a morbid way, but I'm like, like I think that when people are going through alienation, like Mick said, like the world hates me, but I feel like you think I'm the only one that's going through this. No one else understands. You don't understand the darkest of dark. You don't understand the thoughts that go through my head. You don't understand what's happening, because you look out and it's like the world is still going, right? And it's almost like nothing is happening, but you're like, my world is crumbling and no one gets it. So I love that both of you have like shared your stories. Thank you so much. Where can everyone find you?
Mick, I'll let you take that one.
the Aftermath Healing, that's where we are. The Aftermath is our podcast that we talk about these issues, and we talk about experts, and we're always looking for those qualified people who can address this. And that's what you have to do. You have to find the right people. But you really hit the nail on the head, because believe me, at the time when I was experiencing this, I thought, yes, I'm the only person in the world. I've looked into the abyss and I can see how ugly it is, and I see how evil really exists in the world. But you also learn, well, you can survive and you can go on. And that's why you have to do other things. So I think one of the part of this healing is really having a podcast and talking to people. And we say this almost every episode, you have to say to our listeners, you are not alone. I know you think you're alone, as I did and as Kindra does, but you're not. There are people who are working very hard and also trying to help. And so please reach out to us at the Aftermath. And we'd love to have people qualified. We like to know more about people who are out there listening.
Yeah. And I will add to that, there's multiple podcasts called The Aftermath. So it's The Aftermath, the epidemic of divorce, custody, and healing, just to be clear. So, and it has both of our pictures on there. So when we reunited a year, or when we met a year, I guess a year in is a picture of us. So together.
I love it. I will absolutely link everything in the show notes because I have that. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time and the tears.
Yeah, no problem. And I will tell everybody, if you are going through it, and you want to make a difference, and a bigger impact outside of your case, reach out to your state rep, and you can just Google, who's my state rep in my area. It'll take you to a page, you put in your address, and it'll tell you who your state rep is. Reach out to them, schedule a meeting with them, a call with them. There is a federal movement going on to change laws in every state, right? So it is widespread. So speak to your rep, explain to them your story, what you're going through. Don't be alone. Don't be isolated. Don't think it's just you, because they need to hear these stories. They need to understand what people are going through. I think for so long we felt guilty, or we felt ashamed, right? Going through, and Mick, I don't know if you felt that way, but that's kind of, I think, the overall feel of somebody that's going through alienation. And when you tell somebody about it, they're like, you're crazy. What did you do to your kid to make him hate you? And that's not true. So there are many, many, many thousands of us. There's actually 22 million Americans going through parental alienation. So you're not alone. And just make sure you make some friends that understand what you're going through, because I think that's the biggest thing, is you can relate.
That's interesting. I'm like, embarrassment, would that be one?
Mm-hmm.
Shame. Like,
Yep. People
Yeah.
I say, what's wrong with you? You know,
Mhm.
I in my case, I never left the marital home. So I was like, well, where's your kid? I mean, this is where she lives, isn't it? Well, where is she? Well, yeah, I was difficulty understanding it and explaining it because what Kindra says, yeah, everybody thinks you're crazy or there's something wrong. It's the assumption because something is off center and they know that. They just don't know what is off center about the situation that you are in.
Yeah. Oh,
And I
thank
will
you.
offer that there are private showings of the film that I am involved in, the documentary. So if you are interested in having a private showing with your legislator and not telling your story, but just hosting, several people together, I am more than willing. If you want to reach out to me, I'm sure you can just Google Kendra Reiber and reach out to me, and I'll put you in contact so that you guys can get a private showing of that film and start educating people, because there's lots of stories on there and they're all very identical.
What is it? What is the film?
The film is a documentary that was made by two filmmakers that just was passionate for a change in the US. And so we are showing it across the United States. It's called We the Parents, and it is not available on YouTube. It's not available for public, but if you just reach out, we will be able to get you, or if you reach out to the National Parents Organization, they should have access to the people that can provide you that information for a private showing.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I appreciate your time.
No problem.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.